Hello, welcome to Miss Clark Reads to You. I'm going to read The Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe, and I'm going to point out various pieces of imagery that will convey the mood or the various moods of the story. Remember what mood is. Mood is the atmosphere created by putting sensory details in the setting. We start off with a dismal mood. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. So I'm going to grab my pen, and I'm going to show you some sensory details. Redness of blood, and of course Poe tells us it's horror to look at, and sharp pains. So this is see, this is feel. Dizziness would also be feel. And this is see, profuse bleeding at the pores, and dissolution, the shutting down of organs. And then we see a seizure, and then the person is dead in a half hour. So all of those sensory details create a dismal mood or situation. Okay, so I'm going to clear the screen, and I'm going to go back to my pointer, and we will go to the second paragraph. Now you're going to notice how the mood changes. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court. With these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of despair or frenzy from within. So I just wanted to make a quick mention here that Prince Prospero is happy, okay? And he is dauntless. So we would probably see a smile. And he is sagacious. Okay. And then his dominions are half depopulated. But let's look at his friends. They're 1,000 hale and lighthearted. So now all of a sudden we have this mood of this revel, this party, this ease. It's a magnificent structure. So do you see how Poe, we can see the structure. Oops, I'm sorry, I circled the wrong thing. Okay, and the prince has, let's erase that. The prince has eccentric taste. Okay, so you get a feel for how the outside world is suffering and this inside world is going to be lighthearted. Okay, the abbey was amply provisioned, meaning plenty of food. Again, no worries on the inside. There's a contrast here. Too much worries on the outside. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. So with all of this that they have done, they will defy the contagion, which means they can continue in their lightheartedness. So that would be a good word for the mood. Okay. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or think. Now, look at who's there. Okay. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. Now, look at all the people who are there. Okay. Buffoons, improvisatori, ballet dancers, musicians, beauty, and wine. Wine is about celebration. All these are within, including security, and the Red Death was without. It was outside the walls. So, lightheartedness. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a mass ball of the most unusual magnificence. That's a great word. Entertained. Yes, he has invited them to a mass ball, a magnificent mass ball. It was a voluptuous scene. Okay, let's continue with this lighthearted celebration, this mood of carefree, a carefree mood. It was a voluptuous scene, a sensory scene, that masquerade. But first, let me tell you of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different. It might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. So the Duke and Prince Prospero are synonymous. They are the same person. And we hear that he has a bizarre or a strange taste. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but a little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and each turn a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a corridor which pursued the winding of the suite. Okay, so Poe just gives us a mood and a style. Gothic windows are tall windows. That's an architectural style, but he also hints that in the context of this is going to be a Gothic story. Okay. These windows were of stained glass, whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue. So I want you to imagine in your mind, this is a long hallway, but it's got turns. Each room has a turn to get into it. Okay. And it starts in the east and it ends in the west. Now, there's a reason why Poe would do that. Okay. The day begins in the east. Imagine the party starts at 3, and meaning the sun rises, and then the sun sets in the west. So as the sun is going through these colored stained glass windows, they're shining brightly in casting their hue into these rooms. Okay? I wanted you to get clear on that image because it's creating that Gothic mood that we're in a palace. And now we're going to move into that mood of suspense. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. So you should be picturing this in your mind, this imagery. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements, which is a synonym for windows. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded or covered. Shroud is very interesting word choice because it also means death. A shroud is a body covered with a sheet that is dead. Poe chooses his words all very carefully here. So we're moving now back into that dismal mood. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling, down the walls. So not just hung, a little bit, but they hang, they're shrouding. The black velvet tapestries hang all down the walls in heavy folds. So you see this? It's not violet tapestry or white, it's black velvet shrouding the walls. See that? We're moving into that back to that dismal scene. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes were scarlet in a deep blood color. This is no coincidence. Okay? So the windows are the same color as the avatar of the Red Death. Blood color. Now, in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof. There was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers. So look at this, no light. So this even makes it more that the sun is casting its hue through these windows. Okay? No lights. Moving back into that gloomy, dismal, yet bizarre. That would be another mood, bizarre, that you could capture. But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood opposite to each window a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire. So each window has a tripod of fire in front of it that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illumined the room, and thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the Western, here we go back to that dismal scene, the bizarre scene, but in the Western or Black Chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was, look at this word, ghastly. You could even say ghastly as a mood in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenance of those who entered that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. So let's be clear. Ghastly is a mood. Firelight streaming upon dark hangings through blood-tinted panes or windows, that's imagery. That you're seeing that's creating the ghastly mood. And anybody who goes in there, it's scary to look at their countenance. You know why? Because that red window pane illumination, glowing, shines on their face. And they look like they have the Red Death. I'm just telling you that. Okay? That's done on purpose by Poe. Dismal. Why would the prince do this? Because his taste is bizarre. It was in this apartment also that stood against the western wall a giant clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang. And when the minute hand made the circuit of the face and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical. Okay, so the clock has lungs. Personification, and it's monotonous clang, and it has brazen lungs. Gong, gong, clear and loud. Peculiar. You could say that was a mood. So peculiar a note. So peculiar is the mood. Clang, clear and loud, is the sensory detail that creates that. An emphasis that at each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause. Now, here is what the clanging does to the masqueraders in their performance. I'll declare it. To hearken the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce cease their evolutions, meaning their dancing, their turning of their dancing. Doon, do, doon, do, doon. Waltzing is a lot of turning, dancing moves. Okay? Cease their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company. So here we have some contrast here. Okay, I want to show you the contrast. Check out the contrast. Okay? Brief disconcert of the whole gay company. So when you are disconcerted, you're upset. When you're gay, you're happy. contrast here. So they go from being happy to being disconcerted. Well, what does that look like? That looks like that while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale. The people laughing were pale, and the most aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if confused in reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. That's bizarre, right? We could go back to that's peculiar. Why are they laughing? Well, let's see what the text says. At once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows or promises to each other that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. So let's just continue partying the next time. The next time the clock gongs, we'll just keep going. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock. And then, with the same disconcert and tremulousness in meditation as before. So, notice something very similar here. We have the tremulousness here, that the clock, they tremor when the clock chimes, okay? When it clangs, okay? And then the Red Death, one of the features of the Red Death, interesting, is seizures. Now, right there, with me telling you that, you can foreshadow something. You may be in suspense if this is your first time reading it. You may say, okay, why is that room that color? And the Red Death is that blood color? And why does the clanging create seizures in them? Shaking, wild shaking. Now we're going to go back to that happy mood. But in spite of these things, it was a gay, magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. I love this word peculiar because Poe says it several times. So it's very, very important word. You could grab that mood peculiar and you could use that for your whole entire essay if you were writing an essay on mood. Hint, hint. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decor of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not, meaning not mad. He had directed in great part, so I'm going to go a little bit faster, the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers upon occasion of this great fete, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of what had been seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies such as madman fashions, and there was much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, not a little of that which might have excited disgust. Prince Prospero likes the bizarre, so he made sure that his maskers dressed up with bizarre costumes. Now, how do I know that? Because I can see it in my mind. I see glitter. I see grotesque. I see madman fashions. Okay. There were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, and something of the terrible, and not much excited disgust. So look at all these things are to describe the costumes. To and fro in the 7 chambers, there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams. So this is the revel. This is the happy part right here. All these gorgeous costumes and a multitude of dreams. They're dreaming. Oh, they're so happy. They're in like a la la land from dancing and partying and viewing each other's costumes. And the dreams, ride in and about, taking hue from the rooms and causing the wild music. That's more bizarre too, peculiar. Wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. Okay. And anon there strikes the ebony clock. How peculiar, how bizarre. Striking again, which stands in the hall of the velvet, and then for a moment all is still and all is silent, and save the voice of a clock. The dreams are stiff, frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. Notice the word choice, die. Ha! Poet's so good. The chimes die away, foreshadowing. And you know how it ends. So now that I'm pointing out these things to you, you should be having a whole bunch of aha moments. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. It's very interesting that Poe has these people, their death is about to come in, and he's hinting to it with all of these little subtleties, and they just keep laughing. Remember, they think they're immune. They weren't to think or worry or grieve about the outsiders because security was within. That's what that second paragraph told us. So that's why they're able to dream and live and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever. I just read that part right there. Okay? But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the seven, there are now none of the maskers who venture. For the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes. So as the sun is setting in the west, in comes the ruddy, the bloody light, even deeper. And the blackness of the sable drapery appalls, and to him whose foot fall upon the sable carpet there comes from the near clock an ebony, a muffled peal more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. So it is as if they put their foot in the black apartment, it is although the clock goes, and it's telling them stay out. But these other apartments were densely crowded, so every apartment is where they dance, except for the black velvet room. And then in them beat feverishly the heart of life. Again, great word choice, and fever, because when we're sick, we have a fever. And the revel went whirlingly on. The revel, the good time, the fun. So again, we've got this contrast of moods here. We've got fun, and we've got the impending doom. Until at length there commenced the sound of midnight upon the clock, and then the music ceased, as I have told you, and the evolution of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened perhaps that the more thought crept with more time into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who revelled, and thus too it happened perhaps that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence. Sunk into silence is alliteration. And there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure. Suspense. They're aware of it. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz, a murmur expressive of disapprobation and surprise, and then finally of terror, horror, and disgust. And right now, we're in suspense as they are. We want to know what this thing is. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. What's the big deal? Everybody was dressed up in grotesque and fun, glittery costumes. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited. Dress up as whatever you want. Ha! But the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum, had gone beyond bizarre. There are chords in the heart of most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion, even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally just. There are matters of which no jest can be made. So right now the narrator says, everybody in their mind thought, how dare this person make fun of us and dress up as this thing? And we're still in suspense if it's our first time reading it. What is this thing that is dressed up? What did this person dress up as? The whole company indeed seemed now deeply to feel in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt and shrouded from head to toe in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse. Do you see that? Do you see the gloom? Do you see the gothicness here? that the closest scrutiny might have difficulty in detecting the cheat. So no one could tell who it was because its face looked like a corpse. And yet all this might have been endured if not approved by the mad revelers around. But the mummer, the avatar, the actor, had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. What? It dressed up as the Red Death. It's making fun of them. His vesture was dabbled in blood. See that imagery? Face covered in blood. And his broad brow with the features of face was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon the spectral image, which, with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the walters. So it's moving through slowly, not fast, so it's stalking them. He was seen to be convulsed, so the prince is grossed out. He's like, that's what convulsion is. In the first moment, with a strong shudder, either of terror or distaste, but in the next, his brow reddened with rage. Who dares, he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him, who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements. It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. So the prince is so mad that he's being made fun of for trying to escape the Red Death, that he wants to hang this person. Seize it, he says, grab it, let's remove the mask. And this is irony. This is irony, because you know how this ends. Because you know when they pull off the mask, out goes all that Red Death. But they don't know that. They think they're going to pull off the mask and they're going to see a person that they're going to hang in the morning for making fun of them. For the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had come hushed of the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince, with his group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now with deliberate and stately step. Look at the words, deliberate and stately step. This thing is not afraid of them. It's not afraid of being seized by them and hung by them, made closer approach to the speaker. In fact, it walks so close to the prince as he speaks. But from a certain nameless awe in which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth a hand to seize him. So they were all afraid of it. So that unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person. Look how close he gets to the prince. Less than 3 feet. And while the vast assembly, as of with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the room to the walls. So this is some really great visual imagery here. They're shrinking away from it as it walks by. They're afraid of it. He made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, to the blue chamber, the purple to the green to the orange, and then again to the white, and even thence to the violet. Ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him, nobody decided to arrest him. It was then, however, that Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, he rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers. So it's all the way in the 7th chamber now, you guys. While none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all, he bore aloft a drawn dagger and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, meaning the figure, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. So this Red Death gets right by the clock. His back is facing the prince. Here's the prince, and it turns around. And as soon as it turns around, that's when we hear the scream, you guys. He bore aloft a dagger. So look what happens. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped, gleaming upon the sable carpet. So they're in that black velvet room, upon which instantly afterwards fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then summoning the wild courage of despair, here's our climactic moment, all tied up right here. A throng, a group, a bunch of the revelers, the partygoers, the maskers, the courtiers, at once threw themselves into the black apartment. Notice it says they throw themselves in there. Now they're no longer cautious because their prince has been killed. and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped. They gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask which they handled with so violent a rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. Remember, this is that moment. They take it off, they mask off, and they realize there's no human being in there at all. It is the Red Death personified. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night. I love that. I love that simile. He's stealing their lives from them. And one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel. Look at this last imagery. The halls are covered like dew of their blood. And they were partying. So look at, you've got some more contrast here. They dropped in their revel. They died in their partying. Right in the posture of right where they were, they fell. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay. So as they all died, the ebony clock died. And the flames of the tripods expired. So the flames that were keeping those windows lit, they also died. And darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. So there they die. Everything goes dark. It's like almost like a stage at the end of a play. Everything goes dark and it's over. And Red Death is the true ruler here. Illimitable, unlimited dominion, unlimited rule over all. So this is like the hyperbole. This is the exaggeration of the plague that Poe has created. They thought they could escape it. They did. They felt secure in there enough to have a big party and ignore the people outside who were grieving. And this is how they paid for it. So we covered mood, we covered irony, and we covered some figurative language. All right, I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Go back and watch it again so you can pick up all the different moods that I gave you sensory details to. Can't wait to read to you again. Have a good day.